Good morning and welcome to the Talk Up Radio Show. We are the voice of the Jamaican youth on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk up youth, Masefi.
Talk up youth.
Talk up youth. Welcome to the youths them. Talk up youth, man. Kind of dead dry. Hello. You're on Talk Up Radio. You have a talk up. When ready? Let's try that again. Talk up youth, Masefi.
Talk up youth.
I'll be your bass in my voice. Oh gosh. Can't help it.
Ready.
Alright. So I'm Kristeena Monteith. I'm your producer here. My big bad co-producer Andrica there too, but she go on hold her meds. It's a deep topic we do today. Today's topic is reparations. You know, it's a big word. I want to know what do you think about that. What does reparations mean to you, Romario?
Well, to me, reparation basically means righting a wrong. So basically compensating for some wrongdoing that you've done in the past. So that's basically what reparations mean to me in a nutshell.
Yeah, Matthew, how you feel about it?
For me, pretty much the same, serving justice towards a people or a person who, they might feel as if they need to be repaid for something.
Yeah, man. So those are good, introductions to the topic that we're dealing with today. But, we had to bring in the big guns for this one because a really core topic that, is very relevant right now. So we're getting an official on the topic, somebody who's doing the research and who's in the field, just on this topic. And that is Mr. Stephen Golding. And, he's a part of the Talk Up Radio family, part of the Talk Up Youth family.
Yes.
And you can guess why. It's very obvious. His mama his husband, but it's a big thing. He's the president of the Kingston chapter of the UNIA, that's the Universal Negro Improvement Association. But today he's actually sitting in as a member of the National Council on Reparation. And, that's the body that is, Professor Shepherd is a part of it and all of that. They're doing a lot of research on this topic and they're preparing to make submissions and to get us on this reparations ball. So he's someone that we can ask a lot of the core questions to and get some answers from. And today we actually collected a whole bunch of questions from the youth because the youth are completely, interested in this topic, want to know what's happening, want to understand so that, when we talk about it, we're speaking from a place of information as opposed to just randomly saying what we feel or what we think. So when we come back, we'll be hearing from us and from Stephen and we'll be asking him the questions that the young people have sent us on this big topic. So if you want to join this conversation at any time, you can always call us 630-9371, 630-9372, 630-9373, 630-9374. We know it's a big topic and we know a lot of people are confused and want some clarity on the issue. So that's what we're going to do. And then we'll also be talking about their conference that's coming up. And I'm not going to give you any more on that. Just stay tuned for more. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, you know where we're going. We're going deeper into this reparations issue. You're listening to Talk Up Radio on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk Up Youth, Masefi.
Talk Up Youth.
Welcome back to the Talk Up Radio Show, the voice of the Jamaican youth on Talk Up Youth. We're on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk Up Youth, Masefi.
Talk Up Youth.
Yes, I finally got the energy from these people. Alright, so just running through it again. I'm Kristeena. In studio now we have Miss Dahlia Thomas. Dahlia, what go on?
Nothing. I'm tired, I'm dead, but everything good.
Tell the people who you are.
I'm Talk Up Youth Season 7 cast member. Chatterbox extraordinaire, representing for all the big mouth people out there. Hi.
Yeah, but we have to talk the details. What's your age? Where you go to school? What going for you?
Okay, so I'm 20 years old. I'm currently at the Faculty of Law at the University of the West Indies. Hey. I am studying to become an attorney at law. I hope them let me into them bar.
You're a lot of things.
I'm a lot of things.
What's your connection to this kind of topic?
Anything that has to do with black people I feel very strongly about it. I feel very strongly about principles of Pan-Africanism. So whenever it is that I have the opportunity to speak about issues that affect us as a race or as a culture in general, I tend to jump at that opportunity. I think that's what led me to Talk Up Youth in the first place, because that's what I auditioned with.
Yes,
youth and their connection to black culture and how disconnected we are from it, but how we remain connected to everything else. So, anything like this, mouth open, isn't it?
All right. Matthew.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew McHale. as the students council president of St. George's College.
Hey.
Yeah, come on. I was on Talk Up Youth Season 7 as well, and I find interesting topics like these because I feel like if you really want to go forward, you have to know where you're coming from. And I think the more the youth know where they're coming from and the more they know of their histories, the more they'll be interested in efforts of innovation and stuff like that and developing their people. So this really excites me, and to be in the studio with the big man himself who taught me Garveyism at Heidel, Mr. Stephen Golding, is very exciting for me.
All right. So
Go Heidel!
Come on. You'll get the opportunity to talk to him more today.
Yes.
He's here now. But right before we introduce him, we have to introduce our last panelist today. Well, go on, Mr. Romario Sterling.
All right, so I'm Romario Sterling. I was a part of the first season, the changeover, season 5, Say No Foundation.
Wow, okay.
I'm also a data analyst at Stocks and Securities Limited, so I'm into investment banking. I'm also finishing up my studies at the University of the West Indies.
Where you study?
I study international relations, but I am a stock guru to some extent.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm about that money, so I know how to trade stocks and I like investment banking, so that's the field that I intend on going into. This topic is very interesting to me because I've always questioned the level of inequality that we have in Jamaica. And as somebody who is into investments, whenever I look at the Forbes list, I realize I see mostly white faces. So I really want to be, like, my objective is to be one of those successful black investors. You know, I want to see more black people achieve wealth and create wealth for themselves. So this topic is very interesting to me for that purpose.
Watch out, we can't go on, so. On the people them radio show. Can't manage.
All of you have very unique connections to this topic, but right now we're going to introduce, as Matthew says, the big man himself, Mr. Stephen Golding. How are you do, sir?
I'm still a youth. Talk up youth.
Talk up youth.
Yes, thanks for having me, Kristeena, and let me say good morning to your listeners. Good morning to Dahlia, Romario, Matthew, Andrica.
Yeah, man. All right, let's jump right in. I have nothing more to say because this topic, it speaks for itself. So we got some questions, from the youth, and we're going to jump into them later. But to set the stage for all of this, we kind of have to have a context with, to work within. So one of the big terms that comes up when you're talking about reparations is crime against humanity. That's what they call slavery. They say it's a crime against humanity. What does that mean, Mr. Golding?
A crime against humanity? Yes. It means just that. It is so heinous, so awful, a grievance perpetuated that we call it a crime against our entire race as a species. So it's a crime against humanity. In the case of slavery, let us make clear that slavery has existed for a long time and has been perpetrated against many civilizations. But in terms of the MAFA, which is the term we use for the African Holocaust, the enslavement of Africans between the 16th to 19th century, took a different form in that it was chattel slavery, meaning this was your property to do with as you wished. No laws to protect them, to the security of those individuals, no recognition of them as fellow human beings. And this is where that particular type of slavery has been ruled a crime against humanity, because horrendous and horrible things were done to us, Let me say good morning to the people at the Institute of Jamaica, and let me encourage your listeners who haven't been there yet to go down and take a look at some of the artifacts existing from the slavery, the period of enslavement. It boggles the mind when you sort of peel back the layers to think that you had blacksmiths and people who sat down and conceptualized and built some of these artifacts. You will see some of them designed to allow people to defecate in the mouth of Africans.
Wow.
To cut the children out of the bellies of Africans. Instruments designed to prevent them from trying to escape. I mean, if they were to try of their own volition, they may impale themselves through their Achilles tendon. They may hang themselves if they're running through at night. I mean, collars with big hooks, shackles with big spikes on them. So, this is just awful that you would have people who sit down and conceptualize this with no regards to the humanity of the people who suffered through this, nor any regard to the fact that the African race, the Negro race, is the oldest branch of the human family. We all come from Africa. Even their own scientific experiments and research has proven that. So to have perpetuated that against that people really is a crime against humanity. It's the worst kind of crime that can be committed. And what's important about crimes against humanity is that as declared by the United Nations, crimes that are declared crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations in terms of their prosecution. So if you've committed something that has been declared a crime against humanity, if they don't get you in the time that you're alive, they can still prosecute against that crime 100 years later, 200 years later, 500 years later. It does not matter.
Wow, that's a lot to digest in terms of just the atrocities that were committed against our people.
I mean, at one point you said that slavery been existing, like slavery was around. There were many different types of slavery in many different parts of the world. So what was the nature of the slavery our Negro ancestors endured, and why was it different from that experienced by other groups throughout history, including the type of slavery that existed in pre-colonial Africa?
So before I let Mr. Golding answer that, we're going to take a break, and I'd also like to modify that question to because he's spoken a lot about the first part. So just to explain the difference between our type of slavery that we endured and the slavery that people often say, slavery did there Africa too, black man that's enslaved black man too. So when we come back from the break, I'm going to let Mr. Golding address that directly. But just to let the listeners know that if you're hearing some nice Afrobeats in the background behind the conversation that we're having, these are songs inspired by the Black Panther soundtrack and parts of the Black Panther soundtrack.
Wakanda forever.
I had to highlight it because that the whole OST was fire, like straight lit. But anyway, we'll come back. You know what we're going to talk about. We're talking about reparations with Mr. Stephen Golding, member of the National Council on Reparation. You're listening to Talk Up Radio on Nationwide. Talk Up Youth, Monteith.
Talk Up Youth.
Welcome back to the Talk Up Radio Show, the voice of the Jamaican youth on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk Up Youth, Monteith.
Talk Up Youth.
Today we are talking about reparations with Mr. Stephen Golding. And Romario just asked a very good question, just following up with what we led out from the break. So Romario, go again.
Yeah, so my question was, what exactly is the difference between slavery in the Caribbean and the slavery that existed in Africa?
The slavery that existed in Africa. First of all, let me say this. Even the word slavery, which comes from the word Slav, which according to our own great anthropologist and historian Joel Augustus Rogers, refers to the Slavic people of Eastern Europe, right? I give you that to sort of contextualize the fact that slavery existed all over. The British people were enslaved by the Romans. In Africa, yes, slavery existed as it did in other parts of the globe, but slavery in Africa usually came as a consequence of wars between different kingdoms, territorial wars. And once those prisoners of wars were taken as slaves, it was a mechanism designed to absorb them into that particular tribe. So one of the big differences is the fact that as a slave in Africa, when you had children, your children were not considered slaves. Your children were considered members of the tribe that you were, quote unquote, enslaved to, right? And it wasn't chattel slavery in that they treated you like an animal. How could they do that? You were just somebody previously, they were engaged in war over territorial disputes. Yeah. So it was a means of expanding empires and enlarging kingdoms. Consider it a rites of passage. Okay. So a period you served where the tribe has to make sure that they can trust you. And sometimes you were married to members of the tribe, and your children were integrated into the tribe, much as kings and queens would offer their children to be married to other kings and queens of other empires in order to form bonds and to create mutual kingdoms. Mm-hmm. Chattel slavery, though, refers to the fact that you are property. Just as a man owns a cow, owns a pig, owns a goat, owns chickens. That was the kind of slavery that Europeans imposed upon Africans in the transatlantic slave trade. So laws were made to protect the owner without considering the humanity of the African who was enslaved. So even if I were to steal you away from your owner because I felt a calling to humanity to free you, right?
Like
Laws were made to prosecute me for tampering with the slave owner's property, right? But no laws were made to secure your own well-being or recognition of you as a human being. And that is why our ancestors could be raped. That is why they could be tortured. That is why they could be killed at will without the perpetrators of those crimes fearing any retribution from the law.
Yeah, so I feel like that just ended that whole argument about, slavery did there Africa, so we're not talk about.
There is no more argument.
Yeah, man. And I just wanted to also bring up this, the Zong case that was instrumental in the abolitionist movement.
Benchmark case.
Yeah, man. So I wanted Mr. Golling to talk a little bit about that because I feel like it really sets the stage for understanding exactly how we were treated or people were treated.
There is there was a series out on Fox or Stars, one of these stations, called Taboo. I don't know if any of you have seen it or any of the young people have watched it, featuring this actor Tom Hardy. It's the first modern series I've seen that deals with the issue of the Zong. The issue of the Zong plays a central role in that film. And for those of you who don't know, the Zong was a slave ship that arrived at port in Black River. I forget the year, but we can Google it right now. What was interesting about the case of the Zong is that the slave traffickers who were bringing Africans, either were off course or whatever the reason was, they were delayed in arriving, and the captain began to worry that they would run out of water and not have enough supplies to keep the Africans alive and healthy by the time they arrived. And so as a result, they threw a number of African men and women overboard. Basically murdered them. Why did they do that? Because their cargo was insured. They had taken out insurance on their cargo. And if it was that they arrived and the slaves had not been, if it was proven that they didn't have enough supplies to keep their cargo in good condition, the insurance wouldn't pay, right? But if it is that the Africans were lost to them for some other reason, you guys know how insurance go, right? When you insure property, if a house burns down and so forth, you have to prove certain things before the insurance company is willing to compensate you. And so they chose to murder these Africans, sort of covering up so that they could receive full payment for the value of the cargo, knowing that they would not have arrived in time with all of their cargo intact to get the value, to make full sales and get back the profits that they were expecting to get. And so it is featured in that series Taboo because the main character is somebody who had witnessed what had happened. And there was a group in the UK at the time called the Sons of Africa. This is also featured in the film, even though they changed the character's name. The Sons of Africa consisted of Africans who had previously been enslaved but had acquired their freedom by one way or another. Some of them had fought for the British against the Americans on the promise of freedom. And when the British lost the American Revolutionary War for independence, they brought these Africans to London. Some of them had been freed by their masters or worked and been able to buy their way out of slavery and ended up in London. And the funny thing is, in London, there was no laws permitting slavery at the time.
Yeah.
So you had black people who were living in London free. These people organized themselves into a group referred to as the Sons of Africa. And they were the ones who began petitioning the UK government for the abolition of slavery. Now, I know in Jamaica, when we hear the story, a lot of times we hear about William Wilberforce. Mm-hmm. We hear about William Knibb. We hear about Granville Sharp. Mm-hmm. Those were just the MPs in Parliament who moved the legislation. They were not the lobby group who originally started to say that what is being done to these people is wrong, and we want to bring it to the attention of the British people, and have it brought to a vote, to bring an end to it. It was people like Oluwada Equiano, also known as Gustavus Vassa, right? People like Kotoba Kogano, people like Ignatius Sanchez, black Africans living in the UK at the time who were speaking out about these injustices. And it was Equiano who brought the case of the Zong that he had heard about and found out about, brought it to the attention of William Wilberforce, who then did investigation, and then brought it to the attention of the Parliament. And this is how the abolition legislation started. So a lot of times, one of the important things about reparations, one of the important means of repairing ourselves is to correct the narrative that we've gotten from English books and English history books. The Great Britannia freed the slaves. No such case. It was Africans who knew what it was to live under chattel slavery who began legislating and lobbying and bringing through the halls of Parliament. So as Africans, descendants in the West, let's understand something. One of the things I would love to do is get us to fully change the narrative from us being slaves to the recognition of the fact that we were prisoners of war, that we fought a war. We fought on the continent where they came for us. We fought in the holding cells where they held us. We fought on the ships that they carried us. We fought in the ports that we arrived at. We fought on the plantations they put us on. We yard to the hills and we fought from the hills. Then we had people who were fighting in different means. Lobby groups in the UK, Underground Railroad in the United States. This was a war. An extensive war that we fought for over 300 years. And the reason I want us to understand it from that perspective is the fact that when we talk about reparation cases that set precedents, most of them come out of wars, conflicts between peoples. And then the loser of the war is quick to pay the reparation because it becomes a terms on which the war is ended. Now, because we were scattered, divided, does not mean that these fights weren't taking place, because there wasn't a centralized army with a centralized command to sit down and say, all right, the war is over. But the fact is that war took place and our ancestors did win to a degree. The Maroons won, they signed a treaty. Equiano and the Sons of Africa were victorious in getting that legislation passed, right? And there were a number of others. Chief Taki in Jamaica here, right? Did you all know that Obia is made illegal on our law books because of the Taki Revolution, the so-called Taki Rebellion, the Taki War against the enslavers? And Tachi, as his name is properly pronounced, is an interesting story because he himself was involved in the slave trade while he was in Africa and got sold into this. So he experienced it from both ends, participating as an African, trading enslaved Africans, and as an African enslaved, and as an African rising up out of enslavement to lead a revolution against it.
Lest we forget, there's so much to remember and so much to change our minds about how we think of history. Just to follow up on everything Stephen said, this case, the Zong case, if you want to look it up, it happened in 1781. And just to drive it home, they threw 132 people overboard for some money. 132.
And we're talking about shark-infested waters.
Because the sharks used to follow the ship waiting for them dinner.
Right? That's how impactful it was, even on the ecological system of the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, because when you're transporting over millions of Africans over a period of 300 years,
the sharks know to expect it.
Know. They know.
Some people going to die naturally because of the conditions, but some people, so the sharks knew. But anyway,
I don't know. I think it's very interesting that when we're trying to correct history, we've all been told that, okay, what you learn in prep school is not correct. So Christopher Columbus didn't actually discover the Americas. But now we're learning that things that we actually learn up to the CXC level, things that we learn up to the Cape level about Wilberforce and Granville Sharp, that even those things are incorrect. And we're still blotching out parts of history that have to do with black people because we don't want to present black people as being the forerunners or being strong in anything. I'm actually very upset that it's still a part of my curriculum, well, my high school curriculum, and that there are still children who are sitting down and writing William Wilberforce as a leader of anything in their book.
Yeah, but you still have babies who you're teaching them about London bridges burning down. And Baba Black Sheep had you any wool. So, reparation means that we have to take ownership for our own educational system. When I wrote those exams, I wrote about Equiano. Because our exams used to be sent to Britain to be marked. They would have probably marked me wrong, even though I'm telling the truth, because it don't follow the curriculum that they're teaching. So you have to understand, our teachers were working with a system given to them, and that's how we developed this thing of just preparing students to meet the exams according to the curriculum that they're being given. So this brings into question our whole sovereignty, our whole independence, and so forth. So reparation means a whole re-education of our people, starting with our teachers, and a whole reformat of our educational curriculum.
And on that note, let's take the break. When we come back, we have much more to talk about reparations. Talk Up Youth, Masefi.
Talk Up Youth.
Welcome back to the Talk Up Radio Show, the voice of the Jamaican youth on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk Up Youth, Masefi.
Talk Up Youth.
I'm Kristeena. I'm a producer and your host. Today we're talking about reparations. In studio with me, we have Dahlia.
Hi, everybody.
Matthew.
Hey.
Romario.
Yo.
And Mr. Stephen Golding.
Well, go on, Jamaica.
All right, so let's jump into some more of these questions.
So Mr. Golding, chief educator, let me put it, on this whole issue. I really want to ask you, because you brought up the fact that in order for us to really experience this sort of change that we need to experience, there has to be an entire cognitive shift among the people. So I really want to ask you the question, how have the power dynamics created by enslavement in the Caribbean continued to really affect our people?
I'm looking here at the CARICOM Reparation site. It's caricomreparations.org, right? And if I can just read briefly, it says that the CARICOM Reparations Commission asserts that European governments, right, were owners and traders of enslaved Africans, instructed genocidal actions upon indigenous communities, that they created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans. They defined and enforced African enslavement and native genocide as in their national interest. They refused compensation to the enslaved with the ending of their enslavement. They compensated slave owners at emancipation for the loss of legal property rights in enslaved Africans. They imposed a further 100 years of racial apartheid upon the emancipated. They imposed for another 100 years policies designed to perpetuate suffering upon the emancipated and survivors of genocide. And they have refused to acknowledge such crimes or to compensate victims and their descendants, right? So, what are we talking about? You look at the issue of wealth creation,
right,
amongst former colonies, if we're just taking the Caribbean. Let's just focus on the Caribbean for now. Countries that are predominantly majority African descent, right, make up their population. We comprise a part of the so-called third world. We are not considered industrialized nations. We are nations that have to be asking for financial aid, right, just to maintain our existence or livelihood, right? We are countries that are at the mercies of these so-called industrialized aid donating nations, which are coincidentally the same nations that for 300 years oppressed, brutalized, raped, kidnapped, murdered, exploited our ancestors. So when people talk about, why reparations or what is reparations or slavery was so long ago, why are we still talking about this? We need to wake up and connect the dots. Everything that is happening now in our nations, our entire existence has been determined by the actions taken against our ancestors before. It has led us up to where we are now. You take the island of Jamaica. Do you know why we are an island just developed along our coastline? Have you ever flown over these countries and noticed that once you pass the north coast, you go, there's a big splotch of green of undeveloped until you get to the other coastline to land at Norman Manley Airport. Why is that? Because our entire infrastructure is designed and based upon colonial parameters that are designed to extract the wealth from the country and not to develop the wealth within the country, right? We've only been independent since 1962, right? I am probably the first generation of my family born in an independent Jamaica. My parents were born before independence, right? That means up to that time, we were our government was run by policies made not at Duke Street, but at Downing Street and at, I forget what them call the place where the Parliament, Big Ben, near the Big Ben clock, right? Westminster, right? So who is to take responsibility for where we are today? You're going to tell us, as David Cameron said in 2015, oh, it's in the past, we should move on. He was so rude and out of order, given the fact that we have historical facts tracing his own ancestors to owning major plantation in Grange in Hanover and Westmoreland. And his ancestors were compensated in the amount of 47 million pounds in 1833, 20 of which was paid in cash. And you know where the other 27 came from? You remember in your history books they talk about the apprenticeship period?
Yes.
Is that not the biggest con, the biggest scam that has ever been pulled on the Jamaican people? Listen to this. You work a plantation for 300 years. In fact, you have been brought here to work the plantation because the so-called slave masters who owned the plantations couldn't work it themselves. They put the Tainos on it, they were dying. They couldn't do it themselves. They had to go find the strongest, most fortified branch of the human race in terms of physical endurance. I'm not doing propaganda. It's true. If you look on the sporting, if you look on the sporting arenas, you look at the Olympics, look in the World Cup, look everywhere, right? Black people physically, right, are more suited.
Pele, you say
we're
right?
better at everything.
All right, I didn't say it. She said it, right? But anyway, you had to bring us here to work that plantation. We worked that plantation for 300 years. Then after 300 years, you tell us that we turn apprentice. How you work an industry for 300 years and then you turn apprentice.
Honestly.
In the sense of
What they
the definition
did
of the word, meaning learner.
Exactly.
What they did was in legislating compensation for the so-called slave owners, awarding them that amount of 47 million, 20 million in cash. The other 27 million was calculated to work out to 4 years of free labor. And that is why they told our ancestors to go back on the plantation for 4 more years, even though they're now free. Even though they're now so-called emancipated. They must go back on the plantation for 4 more years to work without compensation. Or go out into the bush by themselves and fend for themselves. Some of these families had been living on these plantations for 3, 4, 5 generations. They knew no other life. And that's the choice you give them. So you can see that the British abolition and emancipation of the Africans had nothing to do with their consideration of our humanity. It was simply political maneuvering, and legislation was made to add insult to injury, to pay monies not to the Africans who had suffered, but to the Europeans who had victimized them.
And it was almost a continuation of the dehumanization, because, I mean, even while they were teaching us Bandula CXC history, like, when they taught us, okay, apprenticeship, you had to work on the plantation for X more, when they tried to reason it out to us, why we needed to have apprenticeship, while our teachers tried to reason it out to us that we needed apprenticeship, it was, oh, the Caribbean was so used to this kind of economy, or we needed to find a way to calmly ease out of
those
it.
Narratives,
and I'm just wondering, which African person agreed to this?
Those narratives were written by Europe. You're so right. It's a scam. It's
Honestly,
a scam. You see what's going on
was
in Jamaica now, and the United States is so concerned about us scamming their citizens. Well, who was concerned with the big scam that was pulled off in 1834 and lasted until 1838? And what corrective measures have been made? We want to let the world know right now that this generation is woke. We are woke, and we are looking back and we are saying to them, yo, no big can you pull upon with ancestors. You think so we're just going to keep quiet about it right now?
Mr. Cameron.
We want to rewind. Listen, what's even more shocking about David Cameron is that while he was here in 2015 telling us that he doesn't think reparations is the way to go. And that it's in the past, we must move on. While he was saying those words here, the UK Treasury was just finishing paying off the loan that they took out to give cash disbursements of $20 million to the slave owners, so-called, at the time. Now, you know what that means? You think the scam in 1834 about the prentice, about your style man as prentice, after you don't know nothing about the plantation and I work it for 5 generations. You think that was bad? If you think that was bad, get this. If they just paid off that loan in 2015, which means they had refinanced it over a period of just under 200 years, or a little, just under 200 years, maybe 15 years short of 200 years, right? If they did that, it meant that our ancestors who were in Britain, those who went in the Windrush, those who went before independence, after independence, and have been living there for generations, and have been working and supporting us here in Jamaica because of how we don't have any wealth creation, because of how our economy is meant to extract and not input, right? Their taxes were being used to pay back slave owners.
Oh, yes, because they're the ones who suffered
not only the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors before emancipation, but the blood and sweat of our ancestors after emancipation, right up to 2015. We didn't have to call them ancestors because we have cousins that live in England right now who was paying taxes before 2015. That means that FIDE money was going back to pay not the Africans, but the European slave owners, enslavers, rapists, brutalizers, oppressors. Let's just use the word from Black Panther. Colonizers. Is that not another con? Is that not a big scam? Big scam. Does that not hurt your feelings? Does that not upset you? And the Prime Minister come here and tell us it's in the past. We must move on. Let me tell you something. Jamaicans would say, "Oh, no, make we shut you up."
Hey, speaking of move on, we're going to take a break on that big note. I tell you about the real scam of them.
Honestly.
Them dead, right? Alright, we're on Talk Up Radio. We still come back. We're talking about reparations with Mr. Stephen Golding. Talk Up Youth, Mr. Effie?
Talk Up Youth!
Back to the Talk Up Radio Show, the voice of the Jamaican youth on Talk Up Youth. Mr. Effie, Talk Up Youth.
Talk Up Youth.
Alright. So, Dahlia, man, just like to tell you the break how the scam affect all me, you know, because go England and buy things and pay the tax part,
them GCT, girl. We should have known. Yeah. Not thief couple sweetie.
No, sir, we're not thief. Not even under them conditions that we're not thief. So we have a lot of questions to ask on this topic of reparations, and we're diving in deep on it, you know. So a lot of the questions that we're going to ask now were actually sent to us by young people. These are their unfiltered opinions and ideas around this topic, and I think that it's very important that we keep young people in the loop, because this is our fight too, and I feel like sometimes we feel disconnected from it. We feel like it's a long time thing, especially because of how we've been educated on the topic, and with globalization, you know, a lot of barriers have been broken. We feel more global in some sense. A lot of us, we feel like we're part of, you know, US pop culture, Western ideology. We don't feel so divorced from it. You understand?
And cultures where people telling us that it's in the past and we should move on.
Yes, some people feel connections to those things too. Like, I have black friends, black like me, who say, why are we always talking about this slavery thing?
You know,
can we get over it?
And that is part of what the National Council on Reparation seeks to sort of resolve, because we want to be united on the topic. Not just as a nation, but also as a region, and certainly as a race, right? But let me say this. It is not unusual. I mean, I know the history of the Jewish people who, let me just say this, whose Holocaust took place just little under a decade, right? Not quite a decade. But yet they received reparations from the German government and continue to receive reparation from the German government. I mean, millions into the billions of marks have been paid out. But even when the Jews were first negotiating that, and they were enacting the acts of parliament, of the Knesset, as they call their parliament, to allow for that, you had Jewish naysayers. You had people not willing to receive reparations. You had people who felt that by taking German money, you were saying it was okay what was done to your ancestors and that everything was being resolved. You had people threatening to bomb the Knesset on the day that the acts were being signed, right? So it's not unusual to have naysayers. But I want to say to our people this, as my wife would say, my people, my people, my people.
My
right?
youth.
Whether you agree or not, right? Get on board the reparation train, because it is certainly not going to be, power concedes nothing without a demand, and you have to demand from a place of power to receive these things sometimes. And if we continue to be disunited and divided, it only plays into the hands of those who should be paying reparation. And it is the reason why the UK Treasury feels that they could tweet out a few weeks ago, because this is how we got the information about the taxes. The UK Treasury sent a tweet. Give thanks for social media.
Hey.
They pulled it down within 36 hours though, but it was too late. The information had already gone out there, right? And if we remain divided, we are continuing to give them the ammunition they need to resist sitting down at the table and first giving a full and formal apology, because this is something they have not yet done yet. You have to notice how European politicians and their various monarchies, because you still have queens in Spain, in Netherlands, in a number of countries, England, UK that participated in the slave trade, and they're very selective when they speak about slavery. I mean, the Dutch queen, I think, was in Ghana a few years ago, and the word that they like to use is, it is regrettable. It is unfortunate. Now, to say something is regrettable and something is unfortunate is stopping far short of saying, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong, right? The Queen even of England even said at one point that, look, slavery was legal, so we didn't break any laws. But who signed the laws into to act at that time? Not the same monarchy. You understand what I'm saying? So I just want the people to understand that for our own dignity, for our own standing in the wider community of the human race, right? If you don't agree with reparations, keep it to yourself now, right? Keep it to yourself and make we do the work that we're doing, right? Let's get the momentum going, because the fact is that the Jews receive compensation for 10 years. We suffered for 300. All right, American Indians who were dispossessed of their land in America and then forced onto reservations, right? Those reservations were mismanaged by the United States government. They sued for reparations and received hundreds of millions of dollars paid out by the Obama administration, right? But I'm still suggesting to you that what they suffered was far less than our ancestors did. Japanese Americans who were locked up for a few years during World War II received compensation of well over 20 million or something like that. I'm still saying it was unfortunate what was done to them, but it was nothing compared to what my ancestors went through. Koreans in Korea the other day were rejecting reparations payments already made by the Japanese government for the prostitution of Korean women during World War II, and saying that more needed to be paid, right? And I would not want anybody to prostitute my mothers and sisters, and I feel bad for the Koreans. But I still say that little period they were occupied by Japan and were forced into prostitution is nothing compared to my mothers and sisters, grandmothers, aunts, nieces, daughters being dragged out to the great house whenever master feel like to do it as he pleased, and to invite his friends to do it as they please. And that went on not for one generation, not for one war, not for 10 years, but for 5 successive generations, for 300 years. And I wouldn't even say 5 generations, because enslaved Africans didn't live as long as 60.
There you go.
So maybe even more generations, and because they were quote unquote bred very early. So it might have been more like 10 generations, right? So if all of that happened, and we know that history, let us not embarrass ourselves as black people talking about we don't want reparations, we're not entitled to reparations, we sold each other and they didn't do anything wrong. I mean, there's a fellow who writes to the papers all the time, and I want to tell the newspaper, stop publishing him. What's wrong with you? Right? The Observer and the Gleaner, I'm calling him out by name. Stop publishing him, because he's talking foolishness, and you, by publishing him, are adding to the fact. I want to ask you all in the media, get on board the reparation train and cut out the foolishness. All right? This question should have been settled 200 years ago. The fact that it was not settled, I'm not heaping blame on our ancestors' shoulders, because they had more serious priorities they had to deal with. But it is obvious that the time has come, and this generation is prepared to finish what they started and to get answers for this. And we don't want anybody from our own family standing in our way. Right? And if you continue to stand in our way, you're going to get rolled over like a steam press. I promise you that, right? So even if you don't agree, just stand quietly on the sideline and make we do what we are doing. See me?
And not even just reparations, like on speaking about the Jews, but even recent times, people are still, like, they're being dragged before a court of law because of what they did to the Jews. People are literally being made to be held accountable by the justice system for the Holocaust.
If you deny the Holocaust in Germany right now, it's a crime. It's on the books. They lock you up for that. Yet we have black people writing to the papers talking about, oh, we did it to ourselves.
Exactly.
Oh, and we don't... listen, you know what? MPs, I want to put a law in the book. So anybody who talk bad against reparation...
Lock them up.
Oh, you mean GP?
Lock them up.
On that note, we have to take a break. You're listening to Talk Up Radio on Nationwide 90 FM. Talk Up Youth, Musefi.
Talk Up Youth.
And I'm sending greetings to all the Angelas in the place. No, Angela not in the room, but still, big on up. I love this song. It's a Afrobeat song. You are listening to the Talk Up Radio Show on Nationwide 90 FM, the voice of the Jamaican youth. Talk Up Youth, Musefi.
Talk Up Youth.
We're talking reparations, and I am so sorry to disappoint Mr. Golding right now still, because a lot of what him just say a full question. A lot of that the youths did want some answers to. So, you know, like I said before, it's very important to understand where we are, how we think, and, you know, so that we can address the loopholes and the ignorance that exists out there. We need to plug the gaps. All right, so let's just jump into some of these questions that we got sent in. Let's start from the top. Mr. Golding, just a quick explanation. What exactly is reparation?
What is it?
White B.
Reparation it's from the Latin word, which means repair, right? It refers to redressing a wrong which has been done. And in international law, it is a recognized principle that nations or individuals who have wronged other nations or individuals should make reparation to repair the damage which has been suffered. So in the context of which we're speaking, it refers to specifically the wrongs done to people of African descent in the period of the transatlantic trade in Africans and the system of enslavement here in the Americas, chattel enslavement.
All right, so Shelley wants to know, what societal impact do you expect reparations to have?
The CARICOM Reparations Commission advocates for a 10-point action plan, right? That consists of 1, a full and formal apology, 2, repatriation for those who would like to return to Africa, 3, development program for indigenous peoples, 4, cultural institutions that can begin to correct the narrative so that we don't grow up being brainwashed into a certain way of thinking, which has kept us back from fighting this fight for so long. 5, we have a public health crisis. You know, everybody's talking about mental health issues right now. Well, consider the mental health issues that evolve out of 10 years of chattel enslavement. Raping, brutalizing, making it illegal to educate them, right? So there's that. Illiteracy eradication is the sixth point. 7, an African knowledge-based program. And again, that deals with correcting the narrative and reclaiming the culture. 8, psychological rehabilitation. 9, technology transfer. We're talking about wealth creation. We're talking about the fact that our countries are built to extract raw materials. Well, the free labor we gave Britain for 300 years, right? If you study economics, you know. If you run in a business and you've brought your cost of production almost to a minimum, you know what you've done. You're maximizing profits, and your profits also means that maximum profits means that you have maximum savings, right? When you have maximum savings, it affects your consumption. You know what the result was in the UK? Something we study in the history books known as the Industrial Revolution. That's where they got the money to finance that. So people have to connect the dots, right? So we know that we are the ones who spurred the Industrial Revolution. So we want a transfer of technology now, because a lot of what has been built upon is based upon that, and we're entitled to a share of that. Ted is finally debt cancellation, right? I'm very controversial about that issue, but I'm not going to argue it here on the radio show. The fact is, we are indebted to a number of these so-called multinationals and, whatever. Well, a lot of them are anchored to slave-owning or former slave-trading countries, right? So if you don't want to give us reparation, well, don't dare ask us about payback no debt, And if it was me, people, if you don't put me in a garden house, I would have slapped all a visa upon them. You see, if you have a passport from any of the countries on this list, and you're coming through my airport, worse like how your country tell me about move on, I just move on with all a $5,000 entry fee, every time you come. And I just tell the people, say we call that reparation tax. You see me? Yeah, because if we don't necessarily gonna have to wait for that, if they're not gonna come to the negotiation table out of their own sense of justice and out of their own moral sense of duty, then we can do them like they do us, right? I mean, we still have a residence here for the Queen, right? Our man did a pick Aki off our tree and they lock him up feet, right? But yet when we go to visit the UK, we must get a visa and we must pay for that visa, while our tax-paying dollars is upkeeping a house here, a very big house, with lots of land where you have to pay the garden a whole heap of money if you cut that land there, right? And it's called what? King's house, or really Queen's house as it should be, with pictures of her family going back generations in the halls. And our taxpayer dollars pay for that. So that's almost as bad as our taxpayer dollars that was paying back the slave owners. And then when we want to go visit our head of state, when we want to visit the ruler of our country, then pat we down out of Trafalgar Road and make we pay money, and sometimes they don't even give we the visa. You understand what I'm saying? I just want Jamaicans to wake up, because, if we don't talk about these things, we're going on as if it's normal. This is a normal way to treat people. It's not a normal way to treat people. I mean, if this was being done between two first world countries, if they had these kind of issues between each other, they would have go a war a long time. I mean, what they had them poison a Russian spy in England, he's a Russian spy. And they're saying the Russians poison him. Now, I'm not justifying it, but when you work in the world of espionage, this is one of the consequences, death. This is a part of your day-to-day job, right? And the Russians not happy with what you're doing because you might be giving information. So they execute that caveat in the contract. You sign a contract like that when you go to spy school, right? Yeah. The consequence may be death. They poisoned him. The world now is up in arms to show Russia that this is unacceptable. Russian diplomats have been expelled from the United States, from England, and from other countries joining with the so-called allies, right? To show that they're upset. I want my government and the government of this region to begin to show the UK that they are upset about certain things, right? When the Prime Minister came here and talked that foolishness to the Parliament, the whole Parliament should have walked out on him. And make them put that upon the BBC 1 hour later, right? And if you continue to treat with this issue so lightly, then I dare say, if I were the Prime Minister, I'd start to expel some diplomats.
Argument done. All right. Let's continue though, because a lot was said right there. So, and I love the part especially about where this whole industrial revolution comes from. Because if you remember a couple years ago when the British, the World Olympics was held in England, and they're doing their nice opening ceremony, charting the history of England, and it starts with the agrarian revolution, and I'm like, oh, Zine? So, how old is your empire again?
Honestly.
Because it
Real
started, you
questions
see,
we're
no,
asking
it was
now.
so idyllic, because them start with a nice little hill and a farmer and everything is nice. And then all of a sudden, technology!
Yes.
Everybody
it just
good.
came out of nowhere,
And
right?
then they teach it in this way that makes Europe seem like this powerhouse country, it's like
Pull
a big
themselves
bang
up from them
type
bootstraps.
situation.
But
so
you know-
agrarian and boom, industrial, and it was a period of enlightenment and
Yes,
flowers and
Renaissance.
colors.
It was for them.
It was, but they're flowers that we planted. We planted
Yes.
that industrial revolution, and we deserve to benefit.
You're
from
a
it.
good historian.
Yeah.
You backtrack, right? Remember, sugar was king, Sugar
Yep.
was the drug of its day. Sugar was it's still a drug, and it kill people too,
Amen.
right? But sugar was a drug of its day, and these countries were major traders in what was the drug of the day. And drug dealers make a lot of money, right? Because people need the drugs, and the drugs cost money. So after they were trading this drug that was sugar, they made a lot of money. And then they washed the money through the Industrial Revolution, right? So they began to develop steamships now, and this and that, and sewing machine, and all of that came as a result of the plantation system and as a result of the enslavement of Africans. There is no doubt about that. They themselves know that. So why are you continuing to deny us what is due to us? Is it that we are lesser than? Is it that you want to take man for idiot? Is it that you're saying that we are ignorant? Well, we're demanding it now. We want to talk about it, and we want our children talking about it, and we want our elders talking about it. We want it being spoken about in the churches. We want it being spoken about in the parliaments. We want it being spoken about in the schools. We want it being spoken about on the streets, in the living rooms, on the corner, in the rum bar.
Everywhere.
Right? That is what the National Council on Reparation is trying to do, in sensitizing the people, right? And I will add my own little personal thing to it, because even though this may not be the position of the council wants to do this, diplomatically and mature and blah, blah, blah. Well, me personally, Stephen Gold, me I tell him, say, me want to get angry. Me want to get vexed. Me want to say, yo, really, them a take man for ye that, them do it, and I make we continue for pay and make our hands, no, sir. And when we begin to feel that way, it will begin to reverberate. And soon, we'll have ministers and leaders and politicians who feel that way.
Definitely.
Right? And they won't be in the minority, they will be in the majority, and it will now become a part of the political platform. Because before you go into office, the people going to want to know what you plan to do about reparation.
Hey.
Exactly. And we need governments to start adapting that kind of passion for the situation. Like, we need heads of government and heads of state of the Caribbean. Because whenever it is that these metropolitan countries have an issue, and like these entire continent, when they're having like European Union issues and they're having like Asian Union issues, all their heads of state come together and lobby to the United Nations for these things. But learning recently that we can't tell the last time that every head of state of a Caribbean country has been to one of the Caribbean Leaders Summit. Like, we actually need all heads of state to get on board. We need everybody to actually come out to these heads of government meetings and stop sending like the ministers of grass to come to these meetings. Like, the actual heads of state of these countries need to be coming out to these meetings, and we need to be having serious talks about reparations. It's not for you to send a representative. It's not for you to send a nurse because, she sat in parliament one time. Everybody, all the heads of government of all the Caribbean countries need to come together. So the ministers of grass, who don't actually have any like actual political power.
First of all, I take objection.
To ministers of grass?
Yeah, because Minister of Grass is a big position right now.
No, we're not talking about
industry.
We're not talking about
right?
agriculture, you know. Me I talk about ministers, and me I talk about minister Blue Wire.
We need a
I go
minister
them
of Grass. You know me, I say, Kristeena, we need a
I
minister.
know what you're saying.
That's right.
Wow, okay, just got it. Just got it.
What we need
Another
is to
thing.
take a break. That's what we need. Alright? When we come back, we can talk about this grass thing, little boy. Alright? Talk up, you, Giuseppe.
Talk up, youth.
Welcome back to the Talk Up Radio Show, the voice of the Jamaican youth. We're talking about reparations today, and it's been such an enlightening and powerful discussion so far. And right now, we've been asking some of the questions that the young people sent us, just trying to get some clarity on the issue. And right now, I'm going to do question number 8. And V is asking Mr. Golding, do you think the black people are afraid of white people? And that's why we're so timid about demanding justice.
I think power concedes nothing without a demand, and I don't know that we have felt empowered enough to make these demands up until this time. But that is not to say that these demands have not been made. You know, I think what it needs is to build a consensus around it and build some momentum and some unity around it. Because as I said earlier, if this is something we remain divided on, then it's not going to happen. And on another note, it is necessary that our political directorate take the initiative, because this is where those are the arenas in which these conversations need to be had and need to be initiated. But I firmly believe that government is of the people and for the people, and therefore, if this is the will of the people, it sooner or later has to become the will of the political directorate. So, no, I don't think it's a matter of fear. I think it's a matter of just time and us being in a place of power to make those demands. But I would also say this, the suffering of our ancestors becomes our responsibility, in the fact that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't exist today. Regardless of what they suffered through, they gave life to those who gave life to us. So for us now to turn a blind eye, and this is what I don't like about black people saying, oh, it's in the past, forget it, get over it. You think your ancestors forgot it and got over it? Some of them died fighting it, right? You had those who jumped off of the ships. You had some who committed suicide, but yet you had those who said, you know what, I'm going to hold on. And I would just like every descendant to try and put their mind in that place where their ancestors was, those who chose to go on and survive. What do you think they were thinking? You think they were like, nah, man, this is going to be good because, we're going to have ackee and saltfish, and we're going to win Olympic gold medals, and we're going to have reggae music. So let's just wait another 300 years and they'll be all right. They didn't think that. They must have been thinking, I have to stay alive because sooner or later I will get justice. Sooner or later I will reunite with my family. If I'm not able to do it, then my children will get it done. And I believe in the greater balance. You understand what I'm saying? So sooner or later these wrongs will be made right. They must have, that could have been the only thing that kept them alive, because if you thought that, listen, this thing just going to go on forever and there's not going to be no reprieve, then what was stopping you from jumping off the ship with everybody else? And the fact is, it is a fight that is going to take intergenerations to achieve. Right. And I don't want this generation to be the one to drop the baton, because if you do that, you disrespect the very reason you have to exist. Right? There was a line in that movie, Amistad. There was a line in that movie when the Sinke, who was played by Digimon Honsu, says that, the whole reason I exist right now is because of my ancestors. They speak through me. I can't remember exactly what the line is. I see Kristeena looking for it. But I felt that, man. That is the reality of every African descendant in the West. So for you to wake up and first say, you're not African, we're not African, me not African, me a Jamaican, you disrespect your reason to exist. To talk about the wrongs that your ancestors suffered is in the past and should stay there, you disrespect the very reason you have to exist. And for you to not finish this fight, for them and for your future generations, you disrespect the very reason it is you have to exist. So when you wake up in the morning, and you get up and you wash your face and you look in the mirror to make sure no matter in your eye, remind yourself why it is you exist, that you are looking in your very eyes.
Definitely.
Wow. Mr. Golden, just as he talk about the pain and the suffering that they felt with the hope of being out of it during the time they were alive, one of the questions that Cleveland asked was how do you really put a dollar figure on the pain and the suffering itself of our ancestors?
Listen, the issue goes far beyond a request for payment in monetary terms. It involves a process of reconciliation. It may include an acknowledgement by those whose countries were enriched by the profits of slavery that a crime against humanity was committed, and the making of a solemn apology. And a natural consequence of all this may include monetary compensation in various forms to repair the damage done. But I want people to get this little silly notion out of their head that it's all just about receiving a check. right? Because the truth is, there's a lot more organization that it's going to take before we are ready to receive a check. In fact, I often joke that if I was Europe, I'd have write a check long time. I would have write a check generations ago. You know why? Because the amount of BMW and Clarks we would have buy, it would have just boost my economy 10 times. So I'm glad that we have this time now to settle ourselves, to organize ourselves, to begin to understand the many forms of reparations and the different forms it can take. It's not going to be a check for us all to go to the rum bar and waste it back and send it right back into the coffers of the Europeans, right? Because no, there are not that many black Jamaicans who own rum companies. I'm sorry. In fact, our rum company right now is owned by an Italian company, right? If I'm correct. So we're not just telling you to go run back, to go give the money back to Europe. Right? There are many ways reparation takes form. Marcus Garvey demanded free education for our posterity forever. Freedom of travel. These are important things. Right now, if you want to go to Africa right now, you have to pay money to go through America or go through England. That's wrong, we're saying, under the terms of reparation. Right? You shouldn't be charging us for that. As a matter of fact, we shouldn't be going to any country in Europe and you ask me about I need a visa. You did bring visa for my ancestors when you bring them come over here? So don't ask me for visa now, right? In the United States the other day, Georgetown, Harvard, these are schools who are involved. They uncovered documents revealing that these Jesuit-run institutions at the time had participated in the slave trade. And they had a list of Africans that were bought and sold by these institutions. When they were embarrassed with that piece of history, you know what they responded? Georgetown has said that anybody, no, not just African, anybody who can prove that they are a descendant from one of these Africans, from a number, I think it's like 300 or something like that, on the list, is entitled to attend Georgetown University tuition free. As long as you have the grades and thing to get in. Now, I think that sets an excellent precedence. That's not a check, but it's a form of reparatory justice. That's reparations. And it doesn't only have consequences for this present generation, but their children and their children's children and their children's children into perpetuity. That right now, if I was one of those descendants, I'd be telling my children, you set, man, Georgetown, we say, you know, Georgetown, we said, just study a book, Georgetown, right? Or Harvard or whatever. So I give you that as an example, right? Education, freedom of movement, these are important things. The right to conduct a worldwide and commercial intercourse amongst the race, another one of Garvey's platforms under reparations. Excellent. Because right now, all you have is tankers coming out of Africa. Everything is raw material. There's no trading taking place. We are buying everything from the same people who brutalized our ancestors, and we are not reconnecting with our continent where our ancestors is originally from to build up industry and empires for ourselves. That also is a form of reparatory justice. And we want to remove those policies that put up barriers and barricades to that interaction. For example, this visa system. For example, the air traffic and how it moves around. Right? When you were taking our ancestors from Africa, you were coming directly here. But right now, we don't have no direct flight going back there. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. They went from, it was a triangle trade. They went from here to Europe with the sugar. Right? From Europe to Africa with guns and rum and other stuff that they had produced from the sugar in Europe. And from Europe, straight back over here with slaves. Right? We want to change that route. And that's why repatriation is a part of the program, right? I don't mean repatriation like how people used to say, simplify Marcus Garvey or some back to Africa, like we're saying, pack up your things and go back to Africa. Get those idiotic notions out of your head, right? Get those we're not going to leave Jamaica unpopulated. That's not what we're talking about. But just as how you're wearing clothes that come from China, just as how you're watching films that come from America, just as how you're driving cars that come from Japan, we are saying we want that interaction with Africa because we have more of a right in claiming Africa than we have in claiming any other continent. So since when did we become an ambassador for Japanese cars and European clothes and American media? And we're not ambassadors for Africa. It is because of how the system is set up. So we want to correct that. We want to repair that.
Uganda actually manufactures cars. A lot of people don't know
So does Nigeria and so does Ghana. And I promise you, South Africa is not far behind.
Yeah, man, and I want to point out that there are a lot of good content coming out of, there's a lot of good content coming out of the different African countries. If you, as a millennial, want to connect with African millennials, for example, you can go on YouTube right now and just search The Grapevine. There's a lot of African descendant, first generation US millennials who talk about, the connections they have to the continent. And one of the suggestions that they gave recently in helping everybody around the world, black people, to really connect is to, one, just spend your dollars in Africa. You like this dashiki movement, black millennial melanin movement happening, buy directly from African companies. Talk to them. When you're going on vacation, I know I love Italy, I love Bora Bora. Go Africa, go vacation. Just spend your dollars with that continent.
And I tell you, there are a number of African countries that you don't need a visa to go to.
There you go.
The entire East African community, you don't need a visa to go to, right? If you had a direct flight there.
Yeah.
But you need a visa to go through England and Germany and France and wherever you might choose to fly through to go to those countries. So we want to change that. And part of changing that is the demands that are made by the population. When we have engaged airlines to make direct flights, their first thing them say is that we can't fill the planes because we don't have enough people who want to go. So I want us to answer that, and I want us to change that. I'm tired to see long lines outside the US Embassy and the UK Embassy where them treating you like some criminal, right? Pat you down and put you in behind that glass room and, alright, maybe they don't pat you down, but no, they do. What am I saying? They pat you down before you go in there, man. Yeah, man. You understand? I don't see no lines outside the Nigerian High Commission. I don't see no lines outside the South African High Commission. Why? Because we've been so indoctrinated, right? We've been so indoctrinated to worship Europe and worship America and everything Eurocentric that it's a shame that we are not answering the call of our ancestors whose only thought on those ships, whose only thought that kept them alive on those plantations is the thought of their family back home and how they would reconnect with them one day.
Yeah, man, Mr. Golding, and I have the quote for you right as we got to the break. Joseph Senke, he said, I met my ancestors. I will call into the past, far back to the beginning of time, and beg them to come and help me at the judgment. I will reach back and draw them into me, and they must come. For at this moment, I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
Ashe.
We'll soon come back.
Loving the Afro beats this morning, though, I gotta say.
Yes. That's a Kristeena playlist. That's pop my color
DJ
right
Kristeena.
Yes, okay. So you're listening to the Talk Up Radio Show. This is our last segment on this amazing topic of reparations. And we've covered a lot. I mean, I feel like the groundwork for understanding what this is about and where we're going has pretty much been laid by this conversation. But, there were a lot of questions from the young people. I feel like they had a lot to say on the topic, and I'd love to just get them out there so that you at least know where they're coming from in terms of how they think. So I'm going to ask everybody to just start from the back, from question 22, and we work our way up. So, does it matter that some black people are race traitors and will use the money to support the aims of white supremacy?
No.
L. Jackson asked.
No. Next question.
I think we kind of discussed that earlier. Remember I said we got to use this. Part of the sensitization is understanding the different way that reparations can be used to make sure that it benefits us. All right? And this is why I wanted to get rid of this notion of that it's just some zeros on a check. Right. Monetary value is involved, and we know that. And if I see one of the questions asking how do we calculate, there are a number of ways to calculate, right? We have the historical records that traces those businesses who benefited, insurance companies, banks who benefited. So it might be a matter of how we delineate policy towards those. We might want to say, listen, if you are going to operate in this country because you participated in the slave trade and because you made X amount of dollars, so forth and so forth, then we are demanding that you put X amount of dollars in this sort of social responsibility. Right? And if you don't do that, you can't do business here. I'm just giving an example.
Yeah.
Right? So that doesn't necessarily mean money into the individual pockets of peoples, but it will benefit communities. Maybe every community, not just every parish or not just every town, should have access to some sort of virtual library that where the technology transfer that we're demanding can be accessible, and government would facilitate constructing these places and ensuring that they're protected. I'll give you an example, but can we calculate the amount? Well, I tell you something, it can be less than was paid to the slave owners. So there's where we will start. So if it was 47 million in 1833, let's just work up the equivalent of that in 2018.
And the amount.
Of course it have to.
And
let that be the bottom figure that we work our way up from. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, man, and there are a lot of questions. A lot of people wanted to know, things like, what happened if after all of the negotiations, them just say no? What happened next? And I know Mr. Golding has given some indications of how we can deal with that. We have our own policies on how we interact with these countries, so we can start to, impose sanctions and do those things as well. We're a sovereign nation.
Yes, and Kristeena makes a good point, because I've been saying this a long time. It's time for us to begin to have confidence in our brand. I know that we're afraid to put visas on certain people because we come from this mindset that tourism is our biggest industry, and if we start to prohibit people or to make it hard for people to come and visit, then our tourism industry is going to suffer, and we're going to suffer. And I want to say to the Minister of Tourism today, and the Prime Minister, and everybody listening, right? Jamaica has a brand bigger than that, brethren. This is not 50, 40, 60, 100 years ago. This is today. I have traveled to many countries on this world, and whenever I go and people know I'm a Jamaican, trust me, I love traveling just from the fact that I'm Jamaican. You would be surprised the amount of love we get in the world when people, oh, Jamaica, what Bob Marley, what? And all of them little something there, right? Right? And but I mean, all in fun and games. I've gone to many countries in the world. I've been in situations. I've even been in a bar with neo-Nazis on the border of the United States and Canada at the Niagara Falls. Was up there for a wedding, and I was with African Americans who, when we went to the bar, we realized the bar was filled up with neo-Nazi people, I mean, we thought it was going to go the other way. You see, when me start talk, one of the Nazis, them say, yo, you're Jamaican, blah, 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 da, 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 da. And them love scam music and all kind of something. Yo, trust me, the man them was buying us drinks. You hear what I say? So I want people to be confident in the fact that as Jamaicans, right, we have a brand out there that, listen, if we tell people you're going to have to pay to come here because for your government now answer certain things where is owed to us, they will pay and they will come. You understand? So we have to be confident in the brand, right? That was an ill example to give, right? Neo-Nazis, if people know what neo-Nazis are, yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but they love Jamaicans. Them love ska music. Them love reggae music.
Bob Marley.
How they reconcile that one now? I don't even.
I couldn't figure it out either. I just couldn't figure. I guess they're not as committed to their philosophy.
Perhaps not.
Wow.
Right? And then Bob Marley did say that music heals. Builds all bridges, heals all
wounds. Them can't resist it. So right before we go, because we really have to wrap up now, I just wanted to know some about the work being done by the council and about the conference coming up, because we need to wrap up with some tactical moves that are being made.
Listen, the council's been doing a lot of work. We started last year with a youth baton relay that went around the island to the 14 parishes, focusing on the high school, sensitizing young people about the issue of reparations. We are now focusing on the college youth, university youth, and in that vein, we've been doing some reparation forums. We were at the University of the West Indies, the Michael University College, Excelsior Community College last week. All of this is in preparation for a major youth conference on reparation on May 25th at the conference center, and people should know that May 25th is Africa Day in Africa. It is the anniversary of the founding of the Organization of African Unity, which became the African Union, and it is referred to as African Liberation Day in the diaspora. So we're taking the opportunity of it being our Liberation Day to twin liberation with the topic of reparation. And so we're going to be holding some more of those forums. We're going to be at UTEC. We're going to head out to Shortwood Teachers Christmas College, we're going to Sam Sharp, we're going to NCU, we're going all case out in Portland. We're coming at you. I don't have the dates in front of me. They will be finalized, but all this is going to happen over the next 2 months leading up to May 25th, where we will be bringing 200 delegates from the various schools downtown to the conference center for us to have a conference on reparations, where we'll be addressed by a number of speakers, special guest speakers invited, and so forth. And hopefully we'll have the chair of the CARICOM Commission there, as well as the chairs for our local national council, Professor Shepherd, who was on before. She's one of our co-chairs, as well as Lalita Davis Mattis will also be there, and other council members. So it is to keep the conversation going, keep the arguments flowing, keep the pressure up. We're going to be inviting some of the political directorate there to hear what the young people are saying and to let them know that we have their back in pursuing this thing. So we don't want them ease up, we want them press gas, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, so where can people find more information on social media?
Check out the website, CARICOMreparations.org, CARICOMreparations.org, to find more information about our position as a region and the work of other councils in the area, and follow the Jamaica National Council on Reparation on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, just Google Jamaica National Council on Reparation and you'll find us.
All right, so we have to go. Let's wrap up right now. All right, final word. You have 2 seconds. Go on. Miss your mark. Go on, Dahlia.
Reparations is an issue that affects all of us. It affects us as youth. We need to come on board. We need to stop feeling detached from the issue. Europe continues to benefit from slavery. Therefore, we need to benefit from it as well through reparations.
All right, Romario.
I mean, we must take into consideration the level of inequality that exists in Jamaica and other countries that would have experienced slavery. And as a result of that, I think that inequality should basically influence us to be more passionate about the situation and actually push for reparations.
Matthew.
Yeah, man. Big up Stephen Golding. Big up the CARICOM reparations. You know what I mean?
Press gas.
Yeah, straight towards it.
All right, next week we have another fantastic topic. We'll be talking about creative careers with the I Create Institute. Talk up youth, Masefi.
Talk up youth.